This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support.
I have been running Linux on my iPad for the last few weeks.
I don't believe you.
No, it's true. Actual genuine Linux on an iPad.
Why would you do that?
It all starts with a sorry story of my Android tablet deciding it didn't want to do what I bought it to do anymore. So I think this is maybe a podcast for another day, but very briefly, haven't had updates on my Android tablet forever, and the certificates for what must be the Android equivalent of the Widevine DRM stuff have expired, and all streaming services at the same time said, no, you can't watch any of this stuff anymore, and that was the end of that.
Wow, that sucks. That's like all the video streaming eggs in one basket.
Indeed. So I was like very unhappy about that, and also just about to go on holiday. Now, the good news is that Prime Day happened around the same period, so I was able to buy a basic iPad A16 in the Prime Day offer window and get one for considerably less than they usually retail for, so I was quite happy about that. And because I was going on holiday, I wanted a kickstand for the iPad so that I can wedge it in the safety information tray in the back of the seat on the airplane and turn the back of the seat in front of me into a tablet holder so that I can watch films without having to hold a phone or hold a tablet.
And successfully prevent your fellow passengers from squeezing past you in the event of an accident, yes?
Right, indeed.
Excellent.
Anyway, those kickstands, they're kind of difficult to find. And I did find one that was exactly what I wanted, but it happened to come with a Bluetooth keyboard and trackpad. So this is not the official Apple keyboard and trackpad, because they retail for more than I spent on the iPad, which is kind of ridiculous. And I also wasn't too bothered about the keyboard and trackpad because I had one of those on the outgoing Android tablet back in the day. And that keyboard trackpad experience, at least on this Lenovo P11 tab or whatever it is, was just terrible. I think all of the Android vendors get to implement their own, in air quotes, desktop experience, and Lenovo clearly didn't understand the assignment. So I thought I'd get it because it was only a few quid more than just a basic kickstand, and I thought this might be interesting. Anyway, it turns out this cheap kickstand with Bluetooth keyboard and trackpad is actually rather good. It's very, very usable. And the keyboard is remarkably delightful to type on.
Does it go thock?
It doesn't go thock. It does go click. And I was so impressed with how iPad OS or iOS on an iPad kind of transforms into borderline Mac OS when you attach what it recognizes as a keyboard and a trackpad. Like everything you're familiar with using Mac OS suddenly bursts into life on an iPad. And that got me thinking, well, if I'm going traveling, I usually take a sort of a thin and light laptop in case of emergencies.
In case of a Git emergency.
Yes, in case of Linux emergencies, yes.
A Linux emergency. I mean, we know it happens. Everyone's giggling, but we know it happens. So I thought, what if I can take this iPad with its keyboard as a very compact, in air quotes, computer and use that in case of emergency whilst I'm traveling? So this is what caused me to then get into figuring out how to run Linux on an iPad.
I know some gentlemen of a certain age will take 2 extra pairs of underpants on holiday in case of emergency, but you're taking an iPad and a keyboard. What did you do with this? Let's get to the Linux. What did you do with it?
So there are 2 apps in the Apple App Store that I thought, well, 3 technically, that I just thought were fantastic. And really, all I needed was an SSH client, of which there are many, most of which cost an outrageous amount of money and are also ugly or the utility is poor, and I just wasn't prepared to go down this route. So I was thinking to myself, surely somebody has just made a terminal client, because under the hood, right, it's a kind of Unix there somewhere. Somebody must have done this. And it turns out there are a couple of developers that have done this. So the first thing I used was a tool called A Shell. And there's a sister product called A Shell Mini. They're both in the App Store. And A Shell is, I think, as best as I can tell, like all of the Unix user space tools that come as part of like the Xcode bundle of stuff for macOS, built and compiled natively for iOS. And the kicker is it's wrapped in its own terminal. So its own terminal client. So you open this thing up, you get dropped into a shell where it has a bunch of common utilities, including also a bunch of additional utilities that they have compiled for iOS, which miraculously includes things like GCC, Clang, Perl, Python, just a whole raft of stuff. So if you install the A Shell app, which I think is about 1.3 gigabytes, it's a pretty comprehensive, what you would recognize as Linux user space. But of course, this isn't actual Linux, but it is a lot of that tooling and a lot of familiar things. And the key thing that it has is SSH. So you open this thing. The terminal client that it comes with is very well appointed. It works excellently. And with this keyboard and trackpad attached, I was able to, just use it like a regular terminal client, and I was able to SSH into things. And with the Tailscale app for iOS installed, that gave me the ability to just connect to any of my machines. I was able to just connect anywhere on my network. So that was rather fabulous.
Still not Linux, though, is it?
Not Linux. And there are some drawbacks, like if you have a Git emergency, as Mark was alluding to earlier, it doesn't have actual Git. It has a thing I hadn't encountered before. I think it's called LG2 or something like that, or GL2. It is a Git client, but it's not Git. And it sort of mostly works like Git, but there are things that are different about it. So I don't know why that's bundled as opposed to Git. There must be a reason. I didn't look into it. But it did mean if you wanted to clone something, sometimes it worked, sometimes it was a bit funky. So if you wanted to sort of then use all of that tool chain that it comes with to compile things from source, which you can do, and I did successfully do, but like this LG2 or whatever it was called just isn't quite Git, and there is a number of other things which are not quite Linux.
Was one of the things you compiled Linux?
No.
Oh.
No. I was able to install that via another means, which we'll get to in just a moment. So it's very good. And actually, I spent quite a lot of time using this and actually using the smaller A Shell Mini, because really all I cared about was SSH. And the only trick I needed to figure out is how do I get my SSH keys onto my iPad? And I used a tool called Copy Party, which is a single Python script. And because A Shell comes with a Python interpreter, I was just able to grab the Copy Party Python file from its GitHub project, and I was able to run it. And it does a whole bunch of introspection to figure out what Python libraries I do and don't have installed and adapt accordingly. And then I was able to connect to my iPad from a browser on my Linux PC and send my SSH keys over in order to get SSH working. So that was rather nifty. But there were some drawbacks, not least the Git client, but also no nerd fonts. So my pretty terminal prompt, which I've talked about in the past, just didn't render correctly, and that would not do. So I went off looking for another solution, and I found another app, which we've got linked in the show notes, and this is simply called ISH. And this is rather clever. It's in the App Store. And again, ISH and A Shell, both these projects you can find on GitHub as well. So the source code is available, and they have communities, and people are contributing to them. but ISH is Linux, specifically Alpine Linux. So when you install the ISH app, you get a small Alpine Linux VM. It has a custom Linux kernel that the developer has purpose-built for ISH, because ISH runs in a user mode emulator that does syscall translation, and the Alpine Linux that you're running on your iPad is actually x86 Alpine. And like A Shell, it has a very well-appointed terminal client. So you open it up and you just get dropped into actual proper Linux with a Linux kernel and an actual Linux user space and Alpine, where you can now APK add everything that you might want from the Alpine Linux archive.
This feels a bit like those projects where someone's built like an emulator in JavaScript, and then you can run an OS in your web browser.
It is a bit like that. And actually, ISH has been around for quite some time. Obviously, I'm new to the iPad party. It's been around for years. And I think the reason that it's doing this user mode emulation of x86 is that was the tooling that pre-existed before Apple Silicon came along and a lot of the new Rosetta features and things turned up. So I think perhaps if they were approaching this project today, they might do it differently, where you could actually use the Arch version of Alpine on the iPad and, do away with some of the emulation overhead. And there is some emulation overhead. Like, it is clearly slower than A Shell when you do some things. And because there's syscall translation, there are some incompatibilities. So you do run into some applications that just refuse to run or segfault or whatever. But if you want to use it as a place to SSH from and you want nerd fonts, you know what? It works just fine.
And at this point in the story, is this when you got back on the plane to come home, having successfully just done this?
So you'd think so. No, I kind of had a ban. I wasn't allowed to touch any computing devices until 10 o'clock at night whilst I was on holiday. So much of this setup I did prior to traveling. And although I got all of this up and working and all the rest of it, I didn't actually get to use the Linuxy bits very much at all. But the keyboard and trackpad were a delight, and I got loads of writing done whilst I was away on holiday. So actually, this kickstand that I wanted and the keyboard and trackpad I didn't, it opened up two interesting things. One, you can run Linux on an iPad, and it's surprisingly good and fun. But also, the keyboard and trackpad experience on iOS is actually very usable. And from this point forward, I won't be taking a computer with me when I go traveling. I won't be taking a Linux laptop with me because I've now got an iPad that runs Linux.
This episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/Linux Matters. Tailscale is a proper VPN for connecting your devices and infrastructure together. It's the easiest way to connect devices and services to each other, wherever they are. PCs and laptops, servers, cloud instances, 3D printers, network storage. Connect anything and everything you want, wherever it is, and get started in minutes. Tailscale's personal plan will always be free, and you get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free with no credit card required. So support the show and go to tailscale.com/Linux Matters and try Tailscale out today. Or if you want to use Tailscale at an industrial scale with more users and devices, or take advantage of features like MDM policies, auditing, network flow logging, and priority support, try it out at work using the code Linux25. You'll get 3 free months of any Tailscale paid plan, and you can find out why thousands of companies like Instacart, Hugging Face, and Duolingo have switched to Tailscale. That's code Linux25. I went to what I think is my very first hackathon last week. I've been to all kinds of events, sprints, summits, conferences, unconferences, but I don't think I've ever actually been to somebody else's hackathon.
Don't students do hackathons? Are you back at university?
There were a lot of young people there. Yes. So this all came about because There's a company in London called Tailscale, and a friend of mine, well, a few friends of mine work there. And one of them gave me an invite and said, hey, why don't you come along to this hackathon? I know you're interested in the stuff we're doing. Come and hang out and get stuck in and do some development. Now, we all know secretly I'm not a developer, but that's good because they've got this community space and this whole community of people who are what they like to call AI native development. Yeah, it's not I write code and there's a bit of AI on the side. It's like fully baked in at every step. And I was keen to go along because, well, for a few reasons. I would meet a few friends there, but also I wanted to see what a hackathon was like because I've never organized one myself and I wanted to see the process, how they go, what happens, how they have mentors there who keep people going and all that kind of stuff. So the hackathon was part of the reason why I wanted to go. It's just the experience of going to one. But also the premise sounded interesting to me, a non-developer, which was the whole point of it was develop something at the hackathon in groups that you're not allowed to write code. You have to do the whole thing using AI. Now, that, first of all, to some people is, well, how on earth are you going to do that? You can't create a whole thing out of nothing in a day. And it's not even a full day because you get a few hours in the morning and a few hours in the afternoon. And then you've got to present it at the end of the day. And there's prizes. I think first prize was $2,000 and the second prize was 1,000.
So it's definitely worth giving it a go.
I mean,
I think we're now unearthing why Alan turned up.
Yeah. You'll know I did not get $2,000. Nowhere near, in fact. So that's there to motivate people to, come along and be in with a chance. And, you got poor, impoverished students in central London, in King's Cross, who, might be interested in this kind of thing. But it was such a good atmosphere of people creating stuff. They divided everyone up and spread everyone around into different groups. And then you decided among yourselves what you were going to develop. And there were certain criteria like you get bonus points if you give a good presentation, or bonus points if it looks good, extra points if it works, extra points if you use this particular API from a sponsor, but it wasn't obligatory to use that, which is, pretty common at a hackathon. But the thing that I found super interesting, because I was put with a couple of other people who had an idea of what they wanted to do, and I had a bunch of ideas that I'd made notes on the day before, and I thought, well, maybe we'll do one of these. And we wrote them on Post-it notes, and collectively we picked one of them. And it was somewhat adjunct to what the other two people in the team were familiar with and were working on. And so it was quite useful that we were all kind of on the same page and wanted to create the same kind of thing. The do it all with AI was interesting because, it's very easy to just open a client and say, write me an application or write me a game or whatever, give it a description. But the thing that Tailscale has that resonated with me, that we used at this hackathon, it wasn't obligatory, but I used it, is something called spec-driven development. And I've done this a bit already this year, and it kind of resonates with my head. And the reason why it resonates with my head, and I'll describe what it is in a moment, it resonates with me because whenever I get an idea, I usually run it past another human. And the other human is either Martin or Stuart. And when I run it past them, I usually have a whole conversation with them. And out of that conversation comes a text-based description of what I want to develop. And spec-driven development is very much like that. You create a description of what you want to actually create in code. You don't write the code, you write the spec. And the whole part about Tailscale is you give it some instructions. Not too many instructions. You don't have a conversation with it. You just say, I want to create this thing and give it a description. And you build a specification. And from the specification, Tailscale writes the code. But the key point about it is you're not supposed to really care about the code because you're not supposed to edit the code. You edit the spec. You could throw away the code and the tests and then just tell it to build the code again and you'll get the code again. You care about the spec. Getting the spec nailed is the key part of it. And that was the thing that resonated with me because I already kind of do that in real life when I have conversations with Martin over coffee and with Stuart over Telegram.
I understand entirely now why this resonates with you, because after years of myself and Stuart being nerd sniped with you through conversation and then one line in air quotes specifications that come our way, we've been
Well,
sort of giving you a lending hand to sort of turning some of your ideas into something.
yeah, kind of, because the one line, hey, I've had an idea to do this thing, and I give you one line, is really a test to see if you're going to reply. And if you reply, then we have a conversation and we build a bigger spec. But the problem is I have great difficulty getting from that to a minimum viable product or even a bootstrapped product. Sometimes I'll write a lengthy specification, but don't know the next step because, you know, not a developer, not classically trained ballet or development. And so having something where I can use the bit of my brain that works well, which is describing what I want, is very helpful. Because if I can describe what I want really clearly and then hand it over to Tessel and Tessel says, okay, and then starts writing the code, that works surprisingly well. Now, as with all of these AI nonsense things, it's not perfect and it doesn't get it right first time every time, although it's surprising how much it does. But I found it really quite fun to do because it's a thing I can do. I can articulate what I want. And so being able to do that really gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. And it allowed me to turn a list of ideas that I've had that have been kicking around for ages that I'll open now and again and update the spec. It's like I've been waiting for this for a while, waiting for the rest of the world to catch up so that Alan can dig out these great long specifications and just feed them to an AI and it generate the code. And it's quite surprising that there are things that have been on my inverted commas to-do list or wish list of things when I get time, when I get the skill, when I get the experience, I'll have a go at writing this. Or, you know, when I'm not busy earning money to pay the bills, I'll have a go at doing this, maybe when I retire or something like that. But I don't need to wait anymore because there are tools out there. And Tessel isn't the only one. There's a whole bunch of these things that can turn English language documents, structured documents, into tests and then write code, run the tests. If the tests pass, then you get to try the code. But if the tests fail, the AI fixes the tests or changes the specification. And so what you end up with is code that's tested and works in theory based on the spec you wrote.
Hold on. If the tests fail, it changes the tests or the specification. Shouldn't it change the code so that it passes the tests?
No, you change the spec because the spec is what's used to generate the code. So imagine you don't care about the code and you don't care about the test. All you care about is that the specification, the description you've created will result in a working application.
Okay.
One of the steps is to write the tests.
Yes.
One of the steps is to write the code, right?
Yes.
But if it doesn't pass, then it might be there's an error in the test, or it might be there's an error in the code.
Yes.
But you don't go in and edit the code because then the specification won't match the code. You've got to go back to the start and tweak the specification so that when it next generates the code, it might only generate a small snippet of code, not the whole project all over again. But when it next generates the code, it will generate the correct code or the correct test. It's a really different way of thinking.
Oh, okay. So the assumption is if the test fails, the test is wrong, not it wrote the wrong code.
Right.
It could be both.
Sorry, what I'm not understanding is if your spec is right, but then the code doesn't pass the tests, how can it be that the spec was wrong and you need to change the spec?
I'm not a developer, Mark. I can't answer that question in any detail. What I'm trying to get at is that, no, I think it is possible because I might not have articulated the spec very well. It's not that the spec is wrong. It might be doing what it's being told to do, but not in a way that works the way I expect it to work. Or,
Okay.
You know, I'm not saying I write the best specs. I'm not saying it writes the best code or the best tests, but you put that trifecta together and get it to regenerate the spec and eventually you get the right code. Sometimes it will sit in a loop and just chug through, redo the test, change the parameters, change the environment. Maybe there's a dependency missing and it has to call on me to install a dependency like the monkey flips the switch and I install a dependency and then it carries on going or something like that. It's quite fascinating to watch. And it's quite liberating to just delete the tests and delete the code and not care and then hit the button and say, right, generate it all again. And you get working code again. It's rather bizarre. And I actually quite like it. I like being able to say the source of truth is the spec, not the code, and not the tests.
It is kind of an echo of how I used to be involved in development back in the 90s, where a whole bunch of product managers would spend years working on the product requirements document, and then they'd hand it over to a bunch of developers that would then say, well, that you can't do that.
So, yes. And interestingly, I was giving Martin a demo of this thing earlier on today, and I said, I don't know, let's just make something up. And I said, write an application that I can paste recipes in for my favorite curries, and I want you to store them all, and then I tag them all, and then I want to be able to search on like ingredient or some part of the recipe. And it just did it. And I had a web app, and I gave it a name, Spice Lounge, which is my local curry house. And it had a field where you could just paste a recipe, and then immediately below that was another field where it broke it down into ingredients, the recipe, and then loads of tags underneath, and it just did all of that. And when you save them, you could then search by tag and filter and stuff. And that was a spec that took, well, it was one sentence, and it was a fully functional web app. Now, would I deploy it? Would I let the public on it? No, of course not. But it's just an example of how you can turn something. It's not vibe coding, because you're not saying write this code.
Right.
I said write this specification, and it turned 3 sentences into an entire page of specification, and from that made the tests and the code. So that's where it's slightly different, and I feel a lot more comfortable with it.
And in that order as well. So you provided the overall objective, it generated the specification, and then from that, it wrote the tests, and then it wrote the implementation to match the tests.
I could have intervened at any point and changed the spec, like gone in and go, oh no, it misinterpreted that. I didn't mean that. And you can edit the spec as many times as you like. And that's the focus. You got to get the spec right. Anyway, I found it immensely rewarding because I managed to dust off some projects and bootstrap some things that I would never have done in, I know I would never have done because I've not done them yet. And now, in the space of a day, I can turn something around and give myself a prototype. And I find that really rewarding. So yeah, in many ways, that was my favorite hackathon, being the first, only, and very rewarding one.
Linux Matters is part of the Late Night Linux family. If you enjoy this show, then please consider supporting us and the rest of the Late Night Linux team using the PayPal or Patreon links you can find at linuxmatters.sh/support. For $5 a month on Patreon, you can enjoy an ad-free feed of our show. Or, for $10, get access to all the Late Night Linux shows ad-free. We love to get your feedback via email, show@linuxmatters.sh, or you can chat with us and other listeners in our Telegram group. All the details are available at linuxmatters.sh/contact.
I unexpectedly bought a new phone.
Is it to run Linux?
So I previously spoke about buying a phone on a previous episode of Linux Matters a while back, and I bought a Pixel 6a. And unfortunately, there was a problem with the Pixel 6a I got in that the battery was recalled due to an overheating issue. And this resulted in me getting a very important looking security update pushed to the phone, which I installed and rebooted, and it said, oh, by the way, we've massively limited your battery performance until you get it replaced, which was nice. So the options that Google gave were you can get it replaced for free, or you can have $100 to spend as you like, or you can have $150 to spend on a device from Google. And I looked at my options, and it was not a convenient thing for me to do to actually get the battery replaced. So I took a look at Mozillion, where I got my previous phone from, and decided to take the cash option and buy a new phone. And the phone I went for was a Pixel 8a.
Does it have a proper battery in it, this one?
It does, yes.
Okay,
so
that's
far.
good.
So you might be wondering, after this whole debacle, why I went with another Pixel. And the answer is because I wanted to try out GrapheneOS.
Okay, I'm not up to date on my Android operating system, so what is a GrapheneOS?
GrapheneOS is based on AOSP, Android Open Source Project, and it's a security and privacy hardened version of Android. So you install it And it's actually a very nice install experience as custom ROMs go. You plug your phone in via USB, having enabled OEM unlock in the developer settings. You reboot it into the bootloader and you open a web page and you press about 6 buttons on the web page and it does everything for you. It's really quite clever.
This seems to be the new way. Like when I was talking about custom keyboards and the fact that they're all running a Linux firmware on them, and that's all done through web pages that talk to the device directly. It's all the same gubbins.
Nice.
It's pretty great.
Yeah. So you install GrapheneOS on your phone and boot in, and it's very minimal out of the box. It doesn't have any Google stuff. It just has some basic utilities and its own app store. One of the things in the app store is Google Play. So this isn't like a thing that you flash on alongside the OS. It can install Google Play as an app and Google Play services inside GrapheneOS, but it runs in a sandbox. So it's not running as a highly privileged part of the operating system. It's just running as another app.
That's clever. I'm very intrigued by this.
So you didn't have to put like micro G or any of those weird forks or whatever they are?
No, it is actually full fat Google Play. It basically, rather than having all of the permissions, it has the usual permissions screen in the app settings where you can decide, does it have access to your contacts? Does it have access to your phone calls and so on?
Is that for Google Play itself that then each application that's installed via Google Play adheres to? So you sort of set those permissions once?
No, so each app still has its own permissions as well.
Okay.
So apps that want to interact with Google Play services can do so if you choose to install it. But if you don't, if you only install stuff from another app store, then you don't have to have it at all. What you can also do is use a separate profile and only install Google Play there. And that means that the apps you install in that profile have access to the Google Play stuff, but the apps you install in the other profile don't and never touch any of it.
Is this like user switching profile?
Yes, basically you can do it that way, but I found a far more convenient way that's available as of Android 15, which is called private space. So you can basically set up like a nested, locked and optionally hidden profile inside your main profile. So what I've done is installed Google Play there and any apps which I'm going to want to use that depend on it. And then everything else is just installed in my main profile. And it turns out that while a lot of apps will tell you that they're not going to work without Google Play available, they actually do.
I guess because they're never tested without it.
Yeah.
Right.
So they just assume it's always there. It's interesting they called it, is it called private space?
Private space, yeah.
It's a shame it's not called personal space, like Rick and Morty. I would really love it if it was.
Personal space is the main space on the profile. So if you go anywhere where it can show you things from both, the options are personal and private.
Nice.
Yes.
How long have you had it running on this, the Graphene?
A week so far.
Is it just like running a normal Android device? Have you found any blockers, banking apps, anything not working?
Banking app works fine. My banking app does anyway. Apparently, you won't be able to use Google Wallet to do contactless payment, but Terence Eden has a post on his blog about another app. I think it's called Curve, which you can use for contactless payment on Graphene, so it's possible. So what does work well is just generally being able to be quite specific about what permissions everything has to access. When something wants to access your files or contacts, there's an optional feature called contact scopes and file scopes where you can say, yes, the app has access to my contacts and it thinks it has access to all your contacts, but actually you say it has access to this, this and this contact. So for example, you could, if you have people who you message on WhatsApp and people who you message on Telegram and people who you message on Signal, you can give each app access to just those contacts and they won't know about any other contacts on your device.
Yeah, I can see how that's useful. Like my kids don't have any adults on their Snapchat and they, Telegram is just for the drug dealer and WhatsApp is for everyone else. Yeah, exactly. I get it. Yeah.
And also, it'll let you do things like so I've got WhatsApp running in my private space, but I've got my camera running in my personal space and I can take a photo on my camera and I can say, share this, and then switch to private and select WhatsApp, and it can share that photo through the tunnel and into the private space with one of the private apps and share it that way.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it is. It's really nice. A few things don't work quite that well. So if I want to give something in the private space access via contact scopes to a contact in the personal space. That doesn't work. I'm not sure if that's a bug because the UI is there that it should happen, but it doesn't work.
Where are you getting the majority of your apps from? Is it F-Droid, or are you using the App Store that comes with Graphene?
So the App Store, Graphene's own App Store, is very minimal. It's just for their core apps, essentially,
Right.
and the sandbox bits of Google. Oh, it also includes Android Auto. That works.
And Audio Bookshelf, does that work?
Audio Bookshelf works fine.
Nice.
But yes, so I have F-Droid, and there's another app which you can install from Graphene's App Store called a Crescent or something like that, which has a few bits in. It has a launcher called Mu Launcher, which I've ended up using. And I have Google Play for, the other stuff.
And the most important thing, do you have the Graffiti keyboard?
Of course. This was one of the rough edges. So one of the security features is it uses hardened malloc, whatever that is.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah.
Malloc,
Basically
yeah.
to make memory more secure. Now, Graffiti is the only thing that's given me an error about that. So each of these security and privacy sandboxing features that it has, it's very pragmatic about and granular about. So each app, you can turn something off if it's going to break it, which is quite nice. The only other thing I found, which I did want to do that didn't work, is it doesn't seem to support sharing your fitness data. So if you've got a fitness tracking app that wants to talk to Google Fit and share your data via Google Play services, that just doesn't seem to work. The permission is listed, but it's not there. So I have reported that on the GrapheneOS issue tracker.
Well, that's it for me.
Yeah.
I can't possibly use it.
You almost had him.
But other than that, as a day-to-day Android phone, it's working very well. I continue to do all the things I did on my old phone, but I feel a bit more happy and secure about how I'm doing it.